Mary died on Friday morning, the 29th of June of this year. I had spoken with her the night before to say that my wife Shri and myself would soon travel to be with her in Tomantoul, the pretty highland village where she had lived for many years. In fact, it's the highest community in the north of Scotland. Mary had long wanted us to visit her there. Mary was a culture hero, or should I say culture heroine. Her power lay in the huge numbers of patients and potential patients who were inspired by her life story. She descended into the underworld of the unconscious and emerged unscathed, renewed, and bearing gifts of wisdom. By her archetypical journey, she confirmed Artie Lang's ideas as well as her own, that madness could be a cyclical process that should be understood in its own terms. Moreover, she showed that breakdown could lead to breakthrough, to a cleansing of the self and a refreshment of the mind and a renewal of the soul.
It was the very first day of rehearsals at the Royal Court Theatre, and Mary and I happened to bump into each other at the station. We were a little bit early, and with the greatest simplicity, she just took my hand and started talking to me as Joe. I mean, as you, me, whoever. We were completely in contact with each other. We went and got a cup of tea. And we walked across Sloane Square, and as you may know, the Royal Court very much prides itself on being a writer's theatre, and so the title of the play and the name of the author are all that are displayed outside the theatre. No actors sully that marquee. And as we crossed the road and walked past Peter Jones, I said, "Mary, look, look." And she turned round, and there was the Royal Court across Sloane Square in front of her, and the words in huge neon letters, "Mary Barnes," by David Edith. But she looked, she gasped. And bearing in mind what others have said tonight, an expression came into her face that I now understand better. She was suffused with an inner light, and she nodded, smiling, as if to say, everything's going according to plan. Thank you.
And I like to think that Mary's intense spirituality, intense religiosity, touched me deeply. Because from the time I knew her, I changed. And I eventually became a Hasidic Jew. And I'm very touched by her experience in a way which goes beyond Jew, Catholic, to right the center core, to one's relationship with God. And at the end, all the therapists left and the place collapsed. I think it had to do with Lang, particularly Lang not being here. This house, this room, was his body and his soul. And I think once people felt he had gone, he went off to India and Sri Lanka, then they just tore the place apart.
What went on here was very much an experiment, and a very daring experiment in a way. The notion of a very few rules and making it up as you go along was really founded on not irresponsibility, but rather on a very responsible admission of not knowing. Who actually understands about madness? Who actually knows what's best for someone? And the notion of allowing people to find their own way, in their own time, with whom they pleased and without whom they didn't want to spend time with, was a very radical notion in terms of our existing way of treating people who are considered mentally disturbed in hospitals. But actually it made a lot of sense, and it still makes a lot of sense.
Kingsley Hall was a hippie commune, but it also had this sort of wonderful, grandiose sense that it was setting an agenda not just for itself, but it was providing a model for how the whole of the universe should be, how people should live throughout the universe. It's kind of wonderful and grand and silly and great. It created the ground in which feminism grew, in which the environmental movement grew, and in which, you know, the New Age and alternative medicine and all these things arose out of the perception that the personal is political. And I think Lang provided a vocabulary and a language for that to actually happen.
I thought it was wonderful. I thought it was exciting, it was wonderful, and at times it was driving me mad. It was only when I began to reflect years later that I think about overstepping boundaries, and I would put it a different way, non-containment. Mary was very special, what she went through. There were a lot of people here who needed help, who somehow didn't get it, or didn't change, or only got part of what they wanted. And I think that was because things were so fluid all the time. People were coming and people were going, and Lang was here, then he wasn't here.
I think I would probably think it would be more helpful to people to come into a situation where there were some rules of the game, where there were quite benign rules of the game, but they were absolutely clear. I think this would actually be a help to all concerned. But I think it wasn't a mistake not doing that.
Sure.
I think it was very right, taking our chances with each other and admitting our ignorance.
We're brought together by something, and we can't work out exactly what it is.
That's why we call it family, because they're really, I don't feel like there's a great deal of choice, actually. You know?
Yeah, we find ourselves together, and somehow some kind of need. I mean, one of the questions I wanted to ask was whether you experienced the same sense of urgency that we're experiencing, the urgency to change and for things to move on.
Some of us oldies indeed sense a great urgency. I think if we don't find a way to cooperate and live together more harmoniously and with greater degree of justice, we're going to sink the whole ship. And allow for difference. In fact, allow for vast, infinite difference, because I think we are infinitely different from one another. The urgency, I feel, requires both starting with oneself, but not aiming at oneself, so that I think starting with oneself, but absolutely being attuned to the suffering all around one.
And I think what's happening now in the party scene and also in the scenes that are out there in the streets, reclaiming the streets and travelling and making a nuisance of themselves at the World Trade Organization or wherever, I think a lot of us are also discovering very, very tentatively that we're seeking for the deeply spiritual, but we don't want to use that word.